Okay, hi guys.
Hi everyone.
It's great to be here. So in preparation for this talk, we were looking back on our work and trying to identify maybe some threads in our approach to typography. And one of the things we noticed is an interplay between maybe these kind of two opposing forces of harmony and tension. So obviously with type, you need some harmony because you want those letters to kind of relate to each other. You want words to relate to words. You want some meaning to come through somewhere. But so when everything is in harmony, the design becomes understandable. But when some parts of that design is in tension, a design, I think, really gets noticed. So it's not surprising that tension engages people. Example, every movie that you've ever seen all has tension. They're built on it. They're characters that have a certain chemistry. They fight, they stop talking to each other, they're angry at each other, whatever, they get back together. And these are pretty much the ingredients to anything in order to make it watchable. So how can we bake harmony and tension into design as well? So we'll talk a little bit about maybe our process for that. So like everyone else, we begin each project with a blank page. Some people kind of see this as, you know, the creative process being additive, where you start with nothing and you start kind of adding things in bit by bit. But we kind of see it as the opposite. It's subtractive. It's like you start with everything in the planet, everything you can think of, and you have to start whittling it down. So you have kind of these endless possibilities, which is just like a little bit more positive way of thinking about things. So really the first thing you can do is just kind of make a decision. It doesn't really matter what it is because it starts putting you on a path. And sometimes, you know, you make that first decision and you think, okay, I have a square. Do I want to put some other squares in there? Do I want to make something out of it? You know, what is it? But a lot of times what we try to force ourselves to do is like add something in that's completely unrelated. And just visually, that sort of tension that's created by that is something that's kind of becomes to get interesting. And one of the reasons why we gravitate towards typography is that that blank page even becomes a little bit easier to deal with because you know at the very least you have some kind of verbal content that you have to work with. So this gives you a jumping off point. So one thing to do is you can obviously always just type something in, whatever it is, set it in Helvetica, and right away you're communicating. But as a studio, you know, communication, we feel like it's a little bit overrated. You know, depending on the message, it's often really boring as an audience, as a sort of viewer, to just be communicated to. You know, we're searching for kind of meaning in our lives. We're searching for all sorts of things we don't necessarily need to always be communicated at. So obviously, communication can be good. It's better than total confusion. So this is my actual signature. And obviously, it's a little bit nonsense. There's no information there. But what there is kind of a sense of movement and a personality that's coming through. So I think as a studio, what we're more interested in is that area between communication and confusion, where, for lack of a better term, we're going to label it as ambiguity. Designs that, you know, like if you think about communication, it's something it's trying to get you on your way. Here's the information, go about your day. Ambiguity is more about inviting you to kind of stick around and try to experience things. So this is kind of my design version of a signature. And what we were trying to do here was actually create a visual harmony. So how can you make letters that don't normally look like each other, like the uppercase A, lowercase y, an E and an A, kind of jive aesthetically? And I think the tension in this design comes in just kind of the lack of readability or the invitation to the viewer to kind of sit with it for a moment and try to decipher these things, and hopefully it becomes more memorable because of that. So basically what we're looking for is this kind of hidden space in between harmony and tension. And we've actually been doing this for a little while. We're almost hitting 10 years. So I'm just going to do kind of a quick run through of some projects. So. We're not very good at animation, so that's like our reel there. So we're going to talk today about a few key projects, and we're going to take you through the process for each one and kind of how harmony and tension goes into all that. So we were approached by this brand Everlane at the time that they were kind of getting ready to launch, and they needed an identity. If you're not familiar with Everlane, it's an online fashion company. You can buy a lot of really nice quality basics to wear, and their big thing is transparency. So you really know that you're getting workers who are taken care of, and it's a good quality product and everything like that. So they've started to do really well because people really believe in that aspect of their business. So our job with the identity was to really kind of give form to something that was new to the world and didn't have any kind of history in terms of design. So we had to sort of come up with, what did we do for that? So we were thinking, we'd actually been thinking for a very long time about this kind of typography that we've been seeing places. You see it a lot in kind of older buildings. It's very geometrically based. So you see it here on kind of an old pre-war building. You then kind of see hints of it on other things in terms of like signage. So there's this kind of like, 19th century roots to it. And what's really weird is you start seeing it on things like eye charts, where the geometry is obviously not really conducive for like recognizability, but you're using it as an eye chart anyway. Kind of strange. The other weird thing is that although it's kind of, you see it on a lot of older things, it also is sort of the go-to aesthetic for like science fiction. So if you're looking at Kubrick's Space Odyssey, it's like the look of the future is this kind of Euro style, which kind of fits into that geometry as well. So it was a sort of weird thing where it's like, okay, you have this font that's definitely has some past associations with us, but then also this sense of the future. So we thought, why not apply it to a company which deals with sort of timeless design, but also is very innovative in terms of the way they do their business. So it's this kind of strange combination of both. And the construction of these letterforms. Now we do typefaces for like a lot of our clients, and it's a little embarrassing to show because we actually are quite good at things like ink traps and stuff like that. But like this seemed to just call for like pure geometry, so it actually is just geometry. But what's kind of interesting about that is that you start to get the quirkiness from only from adherence to that. So like when you start looking at the full alphabet, it gets a little bit bizarre. It has a boldness to it, and maybe hopefully not something you would necessarily associate with just with a fashion brand. So the other thing we then do is we paired this font, which became their proprietary font, with Century Schoolbook to give it a kind of tension between these two voices that they can communicate in different ways. So again, you kind of see the tension. And so what we did was we presented all this stuff and kind of gave them this notion, this design, and we gave them all the guidelines, and we were then able to hand it off to the company. So what I'm going to show you now are actually things that they've designed in-house, but very much along the guidelines of both the typeface things that we gave them, but as well like dealing with language and things like that. So you start to see how the system goes together. And we always emphasize the idea of making the typeface very large because we felt like, well, we did the typeface. Let's try to get that as large as possible. They've been very innovative in terms of doing like pop-up shops and various campaigns and printed materials as well as ads on the street.
Sauvage is a new restaurant in Brooklyn, and we were asked to create the identity. And this was a pretty rare experience for us because the client gave us basically carte blanche and a lot of time. So we kind of had to set up a few restrictions so that we could keep focus on what we thought would be important for this project. This is the interior space, and we wanted to create another layer, so to say, some tension between our work and the established interior design. And as you can see, some of the details are inspired by Art Nouveau. You see all those like round corners, brass finishes, and dark wood, and everything felt a bit vintage and old-fashioned. So instead of referencing the obvious Art Nouveau movement, we wanted to create an identity that would be more experimental and wouldn't be linked to something specific, but rather would feel fresh and modern. So we started with the name. The meaning Sauvage is basically wild, untamed. And this kind of inspired us to think of those primal, very primal first expressions of imagery. Super basic things like those cave drawings, cave handprints actually. And we decided to do some prints based on wood printing and other more hand-done older techniques. So we collected different wood shapes and wood blocks to just play around and see what happens. And the result were a lot of different compositions, but they all felt a bit too print-focused and looked like something very familiar. Then we continued in this way. We cut out different textured materials and created those collages, but it still didn't feel like convincing to us and a bit too random and one-dimensional. So that led us to think more about the whole idea of this abstract shapes. Maybe what was missing was to think of forms as tools of communication. This made us think of ancient petroglyphs, abstract symbology that maybe means nothing to us today, but even on some primal level, the softness and harshness of the forms gives you a certain feeling when you see it. We then decided that we wanted to use paper as a medium. It was just the most efficient way to create a wide range of different shapes, and it also fit into our restrictions to use a very primal, or let's say simple way of making images. So after much of trial and error, we established this kind of basic paper petroglyphs that we could use later on. Coming to the typography, one part of it was handwritten, and we decided to de-emphasize the logo, making it the same size as the other handwritten text. And so it became more like a texture and a bit more understated and less pronounced. And we were just glad that the client went with this approach, because usually they want their logo huge and separated from the rest of the typography. And to complement this handwritten text, we chose to use Grilly Type's Walsheim, because we felt some geometry was needed to contrast all this handwork. Coming back to the images, we really wanted to shift the focus to color, to set a certain kind of mood in the restaurant, to also balance this dark wood and this monotone color or materials they were using in the space. And at the time, we had been looking at the work of the architect Louis Barragon, and we were really inspired by the shapes and the colors he used. And we thought maybe we could use this idea for our approach here with Sauvage. And we basically took this one or two-dimensional idea of paper cuts into the third dimension. So we started building those abstract, minimal spaces of colored paper, and photographed them under different light and different angles. So the final step was then to combine those different components into one. And so we had a range of different artworks that we could then apply on those various items. So we created like 12 different images for the menus. And the idea behind it was that not two diners at a table would have the same artwork in their hands, to keep it really colorful and diverse. So each application showcased another image. Individually, they were unique, but they functioned as a set. And although the matchbooks at first glance look conventional, we even tried to push the boundaries here a bit by just using like really large matches, like they were like 4 inches long. Some coasters, coffee cups. We did like a whole range of packaging. Here the website on the mobile device, signage for the facade. In the end, the identity lives really comfortably in the space. It simultaneously contrasts and complements it. Coming to another project, after years of riding the subway in New York, we were really fed up at looking at this ugly subway map, and in 2009 we decided we would do something a bit crazy and try to redesign it. So we started completely from scratch with the goal of improving the geographic accuracy of the land masses. And you can see our Manhattan shape on the right is much closer to reality than the official Manhattan shape on the map, which is too fat, as you can see. They distorted it. So we were even more interested in improving visual hierarchy and aesthetic harmony, less angles, less messiness, clearer design, and especially getting rid of all those speech bubbles on top of the map. So, and the hardest part of everything was pretty much to introduce also the parks, the streets, the secondary rail, the bus information, airports. Everything had to be rebuilt from scratch and had to be created as a hierarchy so that everything is well readable. The next challenge was the typography. Obviously, the NYC subway is synonymous with Helvetica, and don't get us wrong, we love Helvetica, but it was a bit disappointing that with all the amazing typefaces that were birthed in New York, that there wasn't a better local typeface that Massimo could have used maybe when he designed the signage system. So with our map, we tried to use a typeface that had roots in New York. And our inspiration came from two iconic New York designers. So on the left, you see the official Helvetica treatment. On the right is our custom typeface. And was influenced by Tom Geismer's 1964 typeface for mobile oil, and also by Avantgarde by Lou Barlin. And since every single subway map on Earth is color-coded, and we were wondering, would it be possible to actually design a map just using a single color? This kind of added another level of challenge to us. And the result was our one-color subway map. We did some guerrilla tests and posted it in the subway stations. You have to imagine it's like printed in a neon red, so it's extremely glowing, and it's a huge contrast to the dreariness of the stations. And then we watched some people, like this woman, like trying to decipher the map, and I think she must have been from out of town because she didn't realize that this is not the official map, and we felt a bit sorry, but we wanted to watch her from the distance to see if she can figure it out or not. And there were some haters online, because it was blocked about, but that's just the way it is, yeah. But the overwhelming response was positive. We were contacted by so many people from all around the world who have been living in New York at some point in their lives or have visited, and they just felt such a strong connection to the city that they were really happy to have this kind of memorabilia or souvenir, if you want to call it that way. And they were hanging it up and were really happy about it because it kind of connected them to the city, and this was actually the best aspect for us of this project. And then it's funny, we saw this map show up in all kind of random, unexpected places. It was very popular among real estate companies. They just hung up the map in model apartments, and we saw them like focus on Corcoran or Halstead. They just posted those online. It was like, oh my God, what is this? And here you can see we saw it in a design within Reach catalog. It's also, we didn't know that would happen. And then even Massimo liked our map, which was kind of fun to meet him, and we swapped maps. He just didn't understand why we would subvert the design that we painstakingly built from scratch to single color. So after we met with him, we were thinking, okay, if we did a multicolor version, what would this look like? Because we wanted to maintain this subversiveness and conceptual idea that we had with the first version. So many years later, we decided to relaunch this project to answer this question, how we could do a multicolor one, was this one, like wrong color subway map. The idea was that one color would expand into many different ones, but everything would shift colors. So we wouldn't use any of the official colors. Everything had to be completely inappropriate. And the biggest challenge really was to narrow it down to a certain color combination. We tried out hundreds, and you could do really so many, and at the end we had to narrow it down to just two, and we called them RGB and CMY. And we also introduced neon colors, and it really had to be, unfortunately, offset printed because of this tiny information. Otherwise, we would have loved silk screen, but it was not possible. So here's some details of Manhattan in those two different versions. Rolled up posters with the matching belly bands. Downtown. some info tables. So yeah, the subway maps, like most of our projects, began with a conceptual foundation. And the decisions we made along the way always came out of that original concept. And in the design process, you can create a set of rules that guide you, but following rules is not enough, and it's also not that much fun. Sometimes you just have to break those rules and create a little tension in the world. Okay. Thank you.